This presentation will be on how to set up your robot for the first time and also for following seasons. So basically, we're going to be going over modules, electronics, phone configuration, and just how to get the settings on your phone in the first place. There are two generations of electronic systems. There is the HighTech Generation, which was released a long time ago for FTC when it first came out. They are still sold on the HighTech website, and they were the only system that you could possibly use until last summer, which would be summer 2015. Then there's the Modern Robotics Generation, which was released summer of 2015. When it is new and improved, has a lot of different things that make it sturdier and just better in general than the HighTech Generation. And it's been for FTC since 2015 and since 2015. Now these two can actually be used together. So if you have some HighTech modules and some Modern Robotics modules, you can use them together and you won't have to spend too much money buying one or the other. So here's how the system works. So there's two things that flow through the system. There's power, which is supplied by the 9 to 12 volt battery, and then there's the Android device, which can be either a Motorola phone or in most cases a ZTE speed phone. So following the power comes through the battery into what's called the core power distribution module, which is pretty much the hub for everything that goes throughout the robot. And then any power is given out to the modules through these 6 Anderson power pole ports on the top, and they can go out to any of the modules, specifically motor controllers and servo controllers. Now this information comes through the ZTE phone from micro to mini USB cable into the core power distribution module, and then comes out of USB ports on the top of the core power distribution module and goes into all of the modules through USB minis. Now then, so the Modern Robotics Generation has a few differences from the HighTech Generation, and this is just kind of a summary of what it is. So they all have Anderson power pole connectors. They all have USB mini connections for information. They all connect directly to the core power distribution module, so there aren't any extra connections that you need to make. It has sturdy casing, so you won't need to worry about it cracking. And yeah, so the HighTech Generation, on the other hand, is a little stranger and not as put together in a way. So it has screw-in connections, so rather than having Anderson power pole connections, which will always stay in and you won't have to worry about falling out, you have screw-in connections which can fall out and can sometimes lead to faulty connections, which will, your motors might not move or the servo might not move. So then it has 6-pin connections instead of a USB in the back, so you have to connect it through the legacy module, which is another one of the Modern Robotics modules that you can use. So it has weaker casing. A lot of teams over the years have seen cracks in their modules or parts of it breaking off. So that's something to keep in mind. And due to their build, you can only put power in the right side. So you'll see over here on both of the modules that there are 2 power ports. This is because in the previous generation of systems, you had to daisy chain the power through each of the modules. But with the new system, you only have to get 1 power input, so you have to put the power into the right side. And this goes for both modules, so there's the motor controller and the servo controller. Also, you can only put the information into the port under the C in HighTech. If you look behind a module, you will see that there are 2 6-pin ports behind there, and only one of them will actually supply your module with information. This is because, like I said before, the previous system had you daisy chain the information and power, so you had to have 2 ports instead of 1. So just something to keep in mind when you're setting those up if you are. So You can use these generations in any combination like I said before. As you can see here, this setup has primarily modern robotics and then has a HighTech module up here. So you don't have to worry about spending too much money getting one or the other. So this is the core power distribution module, or like what I like to call the CPDM. So this CPDM has a Tamiya connector for power in, which our team likes to replace with Anderson power pole because it's a much sturdier connection. It also has 6 Anderson power poles for power out. It has a USB mini for information in, 7 USBs for information out, and an on-off switch. And also, if you look there, there's a 20 amp fuse, so if that gets blown, you're going to have to replace that. The next one is the Modern Robotics motor controller. It has a USB mini port for information, an Anderson power pole for out power input, 2 Anderson power poles for motors, and 2 motor encoder ports. The Modern Robotics servo controller has a USB mini port for information, Anderson power pole for power input, and YRB ports for servos. So a real quick note, if you look at the side there, you'll see 3 letters. Those say WRB, and that stands for white, black, red. Or white, red, black, sorry. And what that means is you have to line up the colors on the wires with those letters or else your servos won't work, okay? So just something to keep in mind when you're putting on in your servos. Then you have the Modern Robotics device interface module. Now this looks a little daunting, but it's pretty simple. You have a USB mini port that goes directly to the power distribution module. And then you have 6 ports for I2C, 2 PWM ports, 8 analog ports, 8 digital ports, and 2 analog out ports. Now this looks pretty complicated, but you will find that each sensor that you use will use one of these ports. So you're going to want to familiarize yourself with, if you get a new sensor, which port will that go into. And then the last Modern Robotics module is the legacy module, which is used to use previous versions of the electronics setup. So you've got here on either side 3 6-pin ports. So those will be used to connect to the HighTech modules and to NXT sensors. And then you also have a USB mini port that goes to this core power distribution module. Now then, you have the HighTech motor controller, which you have the 6-pin port, which you have to put the information in, which is on the right side, the screw-in power connection, which is also on the right side, and then you have screw-in motor ports. So you basically have raw leads that you stick into the holes and then screw down to make sure that the connections are tight. And then you have 2 encoder ports, just like on the Modern Robotics. Then you have the HighTech servo controller, which is pretty much the same thing. It has a 6-pin port in the back, a screw-in power connection, and 6 YRB ports. So how to hook up the HighTech Generation is pretty simple, but it's a very important point that a lot of people miss. So you have the ZTE phone, which connects to the CPDM, and the CPDM will connect to the legacy module. Now the legacy module, like I said before, is used for connecting to previous generations. So then you will use a 6-pin connector to go to your HighTech. So this is pretty basic, but it's a really important thing to remember if you have any of these modules. So now it's phone setup. So this is a really important part, and you'll actually find, I believe, that you will have parts of this part printed out so you can use them later on because they're very specific instructions. So how the phones work is basically you have a robot controller which sends information, like I said previously, to the core power distribution module and therefore to all of the other modules and motors and servos. And then you have the driver station phone, which you can see right here. The driver station phone is how you are going to interact with your robot when, like remotely. It's pretty much a remote control in a way. You can select programs that you want to run, initialize them, run them, stop them, all from that phone. And you can also have input from gamepads, which will allow you to move your robot in teleop. And then all of this information is transmitted from the driver station to the robot controller over something called Wi-Fi Direct. So, real quick, not a whole ton of people use Android phones anymore, or in the first place at all. So a quick thing, to get to settings, you swipe down from the top of the home screen, and then you'll see this screen right here. So that little arrow will take you to more basic settings, like, do you want your phone to vibrate, airplane mode, Bluetooth, stuff like that. And then the gear will take you to more primary settings, such as, about phone, Wi-Fi, and developer options, which we'll get into later. So basically, what you've got is, if it'll go, there we go. So developer settings. So developer settings are a very important part of the settings, which allows you to get into the actual firmware of the phone and change a few things, which is really important. So you've got to go into the phone setting, go into the about phone settings, which is in the primary settings, click the SW version 7 times, and what's called developer mode will activate. This means that the phone now knows that you're a developer and you know what you're doing, or at least it thinks you do. So you've got, and then when you go out, you'll see a new option called developer options, and if you go into there, you will see a USB debugging line. You click this, and then your computer will be able to read what the phone is saying, and you will be able to debug things a lot easier. And also, it's just required to download programs as well. So then there are the Wi-Fi direct settings, which is really important because if you don't have these settings correct, you'll have to, the judges will not pass your robot for inspection. So you have to pay attention to this part. So you go into the Wi-Fi settings, and then in the bottom right, you'll see 3 little dots. Those will take you to the Wi-Fi direct settings. So in the Wi-Fi direct settings, you have to click rename device, and you must rename your phone to kind of a signature. So what this is it tells other teams, whose phone is that, what is that phone for, so on and so forth. So you have your team number, dash letter designation, dash DS or RC. So you'll see up here, you have our team number, so 8372, dash C, dash RC. So the letter designation is to tell your different phone pairs apart if you have more than one. And the DS or RC is to tell other people, which phone is that? Is that the driver station or the robot controller? And then another thing that you have to do before every single inspection is you go to the Wi-Fi direct settings and you scroll to the bottom and you'll see this thing called remembered groups. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click on all these remembered groups, and every time you click on one, you will be given the option to remove it, and you have to remove all these groups before inspection. So that's something to keep in mind. Now the next thing is downloading the apps. Now this is the first thing you're going to want to do, obviously, before you do anything else. There are 2 apps. There's the FTC, or 3 apps. There is the FTC Robot Controller, the FTC Driver Station, and the Wi-Fi Direct Channel Changing app. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to connect to the internet, download the driver station or the robot controller from the Play Store, and then no matter what, you have to have the Wi-Fi Direct Channel Changer. So basically what this means is you cannot have both the driver station and the robot controller on the same phone. Okay? So you can't have one phone do both things at the same time. That'll mess up your phone. You won't be able to do anything. However, any phone that you have that you're going to be running a robot with must have the Wi-Fi Direct Channel Changer. That's going to be used later on in competitions to change your channel to different ones so that your phones don't get confused. So basic settings, like I said before, you swipe down, you click the little arrow, and you'll get to this. What you want to do to conserve battery life is you want to turn off all the settings and then turn on airplane mode and then Wi-Fi. So what this will do is it'll only keep on the things that you need to have your phone needs to run your robot. Because if you have vibrate and sound and GPS, that's going to drain your battery a lot faster. So that's just something you should do if you want your phones to last longer. So configuration files. So configuration files are the phone's way of knowing what you have plugged in. It cannot automatically sense which motors you have plugged into which ports, and so you need to enter this in what's known as configuration file. So without the configuration file, your phone will not know where to send the commands. It will get the command and then it will be like, okay, which one is motor left? I don't know. So you have to have that. And then you can have multiple configuration files. So let's say you have one pair of phones and 2 robots. You can have one configuration file for one robot and another configuration file for the other. So that's something you can keep in mind. And they are made in the settings of the robot controller, not the driver station. So the first thing you want to do is you open up your robot controller app and you go into the settings, so the 3 dots in the top right, then you click settings. And then you'll see this configure robot. You don't click auto configure, that doesn't work at all. So, and then you go into there and you'll see a list of all your configuration files. Don't question the names, I just kind of spammed the keyboard to get a name. And then you click new to make a new configuration file. It's pretty self-explanatory. Then you will get this screen. So what you want to do is you want to connect your phone to your core power distribution module and then turn on your core power distribution module and make sure that all your modules light up. So the motor and servo controller should have a red light and the legacy and device interface module should have a green light. If they don't have that light, they're probably not going to show up. And then once you've done this, you click scan and your phone will scan the CPDM for any modules connected. And then you should come up with something that looks a little bit like this. You'll have more modules, obviously, but it'll come up with a list of all the modules you have plugged into your CPDM. Now for HighTech, it's a little more complicated, so there's just an extra step. So with HighTech, like I said before, you connect your HighTech through the legacy module. So what you're going to do is you're going to see that, you're going to click on that, and then you'll see a list of ports. Now these are all the ports that you'll see labeled on the actual module. And so you'll go through and be like, okay, I plugged my motor controller into port 3. So you scroll down to port 3, and then you can click on the little drop-down menu, and it'll let you choose what you've plugged in there. So let's say you plugged in a motor controller, you can choose motor controller, and now the phone knows that right there is a motor controller with 2 motor ports. And then of course, you'll have to name it. It doesn't have an automatic name, so you just can like type in motor controller or Bob or whatever you want. And then to edit, so to give names to the actual ports themselves, so what you're plugging the motors and servos into, you click Edit Controller for any HighTech modules, and for any modern robotics modules, they'll just show up like this, and you can click on them right there. Now then, you'll come up with this screen, which is really important. So what you do to add a servo or a motor, you click this little box right here. It's probably hard to see, but there's a little box right there, and that's a checkbox. And so when you click that, you will be presented with the option to type in a device name. Now I would suggest you make these device names very descriptive, such as motor right, motor left, or motor 1 or motor 2. That way it's easier later on in your program to remember those and be like, oh yeah, that's like forklift motor, or that's arm servo, or whatever. Don't call it like, gecko or something. So a quick note, underneath all modules that you plug in, there is a serial number. This serial number is unique to every module that you will plug in. It's not written on the module anywhere, but it's its own signature pretty much. And what that will allow you to do is know which modules aren't showing up when you plug it in. So a quick note, you can write on the back of your module or on the front in Sharpie this serial number, and then when something isn't showing up, you'll know which one is going wrong, and then you can replace the wires or the module or whatever you need to do. And then as the last step, you have to click Save Configuration and name the file something descriptive if you want to. You can say, canine robot, or primary robot, test, whatever you want to. If you don't do this, then it won't save the configuration file and you have to do it all over again. So this is pretty important. Now then, the last thing is that the the phone will only be able to have one configuration file on at a time. Sorry. And so what you'll need to do is you'll need to click activate on whichever configuration file you want to use. So let's say you have your primary robot plugged in, and then you switch it over to the K9 robot. You're going to have to go into your configuration files and activate your K9 configuration file.